Welcome to this ChessGuin opening lesson. In this video, we are going to look at a practical repertoire against the closed Spanish with d6 in the Ruy Lopez. Bishop e7 is the main line. This is the closed Spanish. Though it may look passive to develop the bishop behind the pawn chain, bishop e7 has several purposes. Firstly, it avoids losing tempo from c3 and d4. Secondly, it ensures white gets no tactics involving an e-file pin, nor can they pin the knight with bishop g5. Finally, by developing behind the pawn chain, the bishop can more readily help defend black's kingside. Another common plan, later on, could be rook e8, bishop f8, g6, bishop g7. Black now threatens to win the pawn outright via 6th b5. Removing white's remaining tactical opportunity to win black's e-pawn in exchange for his own. How does white answer this threat? Usually with rook e1. With white's e-pawn finally defended, the threat of bishop takes c6, then knight takes e5 is now critical, as black can no longer recover the pawn tactically with d-pawn takes c6 and queen d4. The main move, b5, permanently cuts out any of that threats. Black usually follows with castling and playing d6, freeing their c6 knight from having to guard e5 and allowing their bishop to develop. Black now has two choices. He continues the main line with d6, or he castles first and reserves the possibility of the Marshall Gambit. In this video, we will focus on d6. With the move d6, Black indicated that he does not plan to play Marshall, so we don't really call this an anti-Marshall variation. But with white, we try to follow the lineup that we would play there as well. a4, the anti-Marshall move. Black now has to do something about the a-pawn takes b5 threat. Since we didn't move c3 to make room for the bishop on c2, it's worth taking a look at the knight's a5 move. Black sacrifices a pawn, but gains our bishop, and our pawn structure won't be the most beautiful. Bishop b7 is the most common move. The bishop attacks the e4. We just take on a 6, and black captures any pawn, d4 arrives, and white has the advantage. Next, let's see how black can defend b5 instead of the knight a5 move. After the natural rook b8, a typical Spanish position emerges, where black can no longer move the knight to a5. This will be discussed in more detail in the 7th castle material. Bishop d7 seems very passive, but now knight a5 can be inconvenient since a8 is protected, and so black can take back with the a6 pawn after a pawn takes b5. So now we give the c2 square to the bishop. If black plays knight a5, we continue with bishop c2, then d4. We also play bishop c2 after castle. Before moving d4, we move the knight to f1. Black tries to find some counterplay on the queenside. I think it's better to give up the bishop than to retreat with it to b1. This is an equal position, where we have a space advantage in exchange for the bishop pair, and we can also play on the c-file. If black tries to remedy this with c5, we are already in a better position after advancing d5. The bishop more often goes to b7 instead of d7. This variation will also be a transition to the 7th castle variation. b4 is followed by c3. We have the opportunity of giving the bishop a more active square than c2 with a5, and thus our bishop will go to a4 in many cases. The rook b8 is usually a useful move for black, as he will want to gain counterplay on this file. Since the a6 pawn is now less protected, we prefer to move the bishop to c4. Black has quite a few moves to choose from here, which are detailed in the PGN. Now let's look at perhaps the best choice of these, bishop to g4. The bishop pinned the knight. Caruana played h3 against Ding in 2019. Now we can take the pawn. And black's only good move is d5, playing in Marshall style. e4 is a threat, so we have to play d3. After the exchanges, black will win the pawn back. Meanwhile, we still managed to get the e5 pawn in this example variation, but objectively this endgame is equal. Now let's look at the main move after a4, bishop to g4. We play c3 again. The continuation is castle, but black has the knight a5, and b4 moves here too. b4 is now less accurate than before. We attack the bishop. The better answer is taking on f3. Bishop h5 would be met by a5, d3, knight b, d2. In this case, we also want to move a5, and then bishop c4. After knight a5, we move the bishop, of course. And black plays his typical plan with c5, which we will see in the main line too. We ask the bishop again. After bishop h5, we can play g4, then a pawn takes b5 and d4. If it takes on f3, we will also continue with the d4 plan. Black's pawn structure looks very bad in exchange for the sacrificed pawn. Let's get back to the main move. h3 is almost always a useful move. Let's look at both of black's possible answers again. After taking on f3, the situation will be a little different than in the previous line. Since black doesn't have a pawn on b4 now, it's not a good idea to sacrifice a pawn on d4. We'll simply continue with d3, then the usual knight maneuver. Black opens the b-file. He can get one of our bishops now, but after that, his options on queenside are pretty much gone. White is in a slightly better position. The bishop can go back to b3, and our knight will be very well positioned on e3. Black can maintain the pin on f3, thus still preventing the move d4. Black can have several more moves, but let's look at the most common one. Black usually wants to play c5 after knight a5. This is an interesting situation. As we have seen so far, we always move the bishop to c2 in these situations, but later we wanted to go back to the a2 g8 diagonal. Now we can even keep it on this diagonal and go back to a2. I also like this move better now because black has to respond well to it. The most common move here is c5, which is already a mistake, and we will be in a better position. The important move would be b4 immediately. This is a short-term sacrifice. Black will eventually regain the pawn if we take it, so I recommend defending the b3 threat with a knight d2. It is also important here that b3 arrives. Bishop b1, then bishop d3 could also be an option, but we can also accept the double f pawns. We cannot take back with the queen, because it needs to protect the b3. Knight h5 comes, the usual maneuver against double f pawns. Black wants to continue with bishop g5, then occupy the f4 square with one of his pieces. We have this nice move to stop black's plan. We protect the b2 pawn, and now our bishop can go to c4. The engine says it is an equal position with opposite-colored bishops. There was b-pawn takes c3 in a Michael Adams Amin Bassam online blitz game instead of b3. White will win the pawn back, and we have better pieces and pawn structure due to the d6 pawn, and a6 is also hanging. Let's see why the c5 move is not so good. We simply play bishop to g5. This continues the plan behind the bishop a2. We eliminate the f6 knight, and then our bishop moves to d5, thus limiting the a5 knight. The bishop is unexplodable from d5. We can also move g4. Our knight can come into play from c4 or b3, and in some cases, it will also be possible to play d4. You can find the full PGN material on ChessGuin.com. The link is in the description.